They put up a steel gate across my legal right-of-way and told me to find another route. Not suggested. Not asked. Told. Like I was some teenager cutting through their backyard instead of the guy whose family had been using that road since Jimmy Carter was in office. And the craziest part is, they were powering their entire luxury development off utility lines that only existed because of my easement. That was the day I realized something about money. It makes people bold. Sometimes bold enough to be stupid. My place sits on 25 acres at the very end of a long gravel road in western North Carolina, about 40 minutes outside Asheville. Nothing glamorous about it. Rolling hardwood forest, a small creek that runs year-round, a modest 2-bedroom cabin my dad built with his own hands in 1981. My parents bought the land back in 1978 when it was just raw acreage and hope. They weren't investors. They were school teachers. They just wanted quiet. The only way in has always been a gravel road that crosses what used to be old man Henry Calloway's farm. Back then it was handshake simple. Henry granted my parents a permanent recorded easement. Lawyers wrote it up. It was filed with the county. Done. That road was legally ours to use forever. For more than 40 years, nobody had a problem with it. I grew up riding my bike down that gravel stretch. Later I drove my first truck over it. When my parents passed, I inherited the land and the cabin, and I kept it up as a rental and weekend retreat. It was steady, peaceful income, nothing flashy. Mostly hikers and retirees looking for quiet. Then the farm sold. A development company called Blue Horizon Land Group bought the entire 200 acres from Henry's grandkids after he passed. They weren't farmers. They were dream sellers. Within months, the pastures were scraped flat, trees cleared, and glossy signs went up advertising something called Ridge Haven Motorcoach Retreat. $500,000 Class A motorhomes only. Private clubhouse. Infinity pool. Gated exclusivity. That word kept showing up. Exclusive. The first time I met their project manager, his name was Bryce Halston. Mid-40s, tan in a way that says vacation more than labor, perfect haircut, driving a pearl white Range Rover like it was part of his uniform. He pulled up while I was replacing deck boards at the cabin. He stepped out smiling, hand extended. Friendly. Polished. Hey there. You must be Daniel Mercer. I'm Bryce. I oversee development next door. We shook hands. His grip was confident but measured, like he practiced it. He looked down the gravel road behind him and then back at me. So we've been reviewing access maps, and we noticed your easement runs right through the main interior drive of our resort. That's going to be, well, less than ideal for our residents. Less than ideal, I repeated. He chuckled lightly. You know how it is. Folks spending $700 grand on a coach don't love random through traffic. Random traffic. I live there. He got to the point fast. We'd like to offer you $30,000 to release your easement. In exchange, we'll help you cut a new access road along the eastern boundary. Cleaner for everyone. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so disconnected from reality. That eastern boundary was dense forest and a ravine that flooded every spring. Building 2 miles of road out there would cost at least $150,000, probably more once permits got involved. Bryce's smile tightened just a touch when I said no. I told him the easement was permanent, recorded, and had been in place since 1978. My parents relied on it. I relied on it. It wasn't for sale. He shifted his weight, hands on hips, looking down the road again. Well, Daniel, circumstances change. Development changes things. Maybe I said, but paperwork doesn't. That was the first crack. Over the next few months, I watched their resort rise out of red clay and sawdust. Paved roads replaced gravel. Stone entry walls went up. Decorative lanterns lined the drive. It was impressive, I'll give them that. They were building a tiny kingdom. I didn't think much more about Bryce's offer. I figured they'd grumble and move on. After all, the easement was clear. County records aren't suggestions. Then one Thursday afternoon, about a week before their grand opening weekend, I drove out to check on my rental between guests. I turned off the highway like I always did, rolled up the gravel stretch, and about halfway down, my headlights caught something that didn't belong there. A steel gate. Tall. Powder-coated black. Locked tight. Mounted between 2 stone pillars that absolutely had not been there the week before. There was a keypad and a shiny sign bolted dead center. Private property. Resort residents only. I sat there in my truck, engine idling, staring at it like it might disappear if I blinked. They hadn't just blocked me. They'd built around me. I got out and walked up to it. Solid steel bars. heavy chain, and industrial padlock. Beyond it, I could see their freshly paved road leading into Ridge Haven, smooth and pristine. My gravel path continued past that pavement, technically still there, but completely unreachable. I called Bryce. Straight to voicemail. I left one message. Calm. Professional. Hey Bryce, I'm standing in front of a locked gate blocking my legal access. I assume this is some misunderstanding. Call me back. He didn't. I waited 10 minutes. Called again. Voicemail. The sun was dipping lower, and I still had to get to the cabin. There was no alternate access. My property was landlocked except for that easement. So I did the only thing I could do. I backed out, drove to the highway shoulder, parked legally, grabbed a backpack and flashlight, and started walking. 2 miles through thick woods, over uneven ground, climbing the edge of that same ravine Bryce thought would make a good road. By the time I reached my cabin, I was sweating and furious. It wasn't just inconvenience. It was disrespect. It was someone deciding they could erase my rights because their buyers expected perfection. Standing on my porch that evening, listening to the creak, I felt something shift in me. My parents had trusted that piece of paper back in 1978. They believed in agreements. In fairness, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in years. Rachel Kim, real estate attorney, college friend, sharp as a tack. She picked up on the second ring. Daniel Mercer. Well, this is a surprise. Yeah, I said, staring out into the trees. I think I need a lawyer. Rachel didn't even hesitate. Tell me everything, she said, and I could hear the legal engine in her brain already warming up. I sat at the small kitchen table in the cabin, boots still muddy from hiking in, and walked her through it from the beginning. The offer, the 30 grand, the exclusive residence line, the new road fantasy, and now the gate. I told her about the sign. I told her I was parked off the highway like some trespasser trying to sneak into my own land. She was quiet for a second after I finished. You still have the original easement recorded with the county? Yes. Book and page number memorized. My dad drilled that into me when I was a kid, like other dads taught baseball stats. Good. Email me everything. Deed, easement language, any letters from them. And Daniel? Yeah. Do not touch that gate. Do not cut that lock. Let them dig this hole properly. That line stuck with me. By the next morning, she'd reviewed the documents. The easement wasn't vague. It was permanent, appurtenant to the land, clearly defined, for ingress, egress, and utility access along that exact corridor. It referenced a meets and bounds description that left zero room for creative interpretation. They're in violation, Rachel said plainly. And if they think slapping up a gate changes that, they're about to learn something expensive. She drafted a formal demand letter and had it sent certified and by email to Blue Horizon Land Group and their registered agent. It gave them 48 hours to remove the obstruction or we'd file for an emergency injunction. 48 hours came and went. No call, no apology, no gate removal. What we did get was a letter from their law firm, some polished downtown Asheville outfit with a logo that probably cost more than my truck. It claimed the easement language was ambiguous in light of modern development conditions and suggested I utilize alternative access routes available along the eastern boundary. I read that sentence 3 times and laughed out loud in my empty cabin. Alternative access. Through a ravine. Rachel didn't laugh. They're posturing, she said. They think you'll get tired. They think legal fees scare you more than inconvenience. So we filed. The motion for emergency injunctive relief went in that week. Rachel attached the easement deed, county maps, photos of the locked gate, even screenshots of my call logs showing I'd tried to resolve it. While we waited for a hearing date, life got weird. My next rental guests arrived on a Friday. I had to meet them at the highway, explain the situation, and hike them in with their luggage. They were from Ohio, in their late 60s, sweet people, trying to celebrate a 50th anniversary. The husband kept saying, "Well, this is an adventure," while his wife tried not to look worried about twisting an ankle. I refunded half their stay out of pure embarrassment. That weekend, I stood at the gate again and watched luxury motor coaches glide past on the paved road behind it. Marble countertops inside, satellite dishes on top, retirees sipping wine in folding chairs. They had security guards now, too. One of them, a young guy named Tyler, stepped out of a golf cart when he saw me. "Sir, this is private property." I stared at him. "You're standing on my easement." He blinked, clearly not paid enough for legal philosophy. "I'm just doing my job." Yeah, I said quietly. So am I. Driving back toward town that evening, something my dad once told me started replaying in my head. He'd said, when they bury utility lines, they usually follow the easement. It's the cleanest legal path. Back in the early 80s, when power first got run to our cabin, the lines were buried along that gravel road. Later came water service. Then cable. All within that same strip of land defined by the easement. I pulled over near the county planning office the next Monday and asked to see utility maps. It took some digging, but there they were. Electrical conduit, water lines, communications cable, all running exactly where my easement sat. And then I noticed something else. Recent permits. Blue Horizon had tied their entire Ridge Haven motorcoach retreat into those same lines. I felt this slow, almost disbelieving grin spread across my face. They weren't just crossing my easement. They were using it. That afternoon, I met Rachel at her office. I spread the utility maps across her conference table like a poker hand. Look at the tie-in points, I said. They're feeding the whole resort off the infrastructure that runs inside my easement corridor. She leaned over, tracing the lines with her finger. Then she leaned back in her chair and let out a low whistle. You've got to be kidding me. Nope. She started laughing. Not polite chuckling. Full-on delighted laughter. Daniel, this is spectacularly bad for them. Explain it to me like I'm not a lawyer. Okay. They are currently blocking your lawful right to access the easement, while simultaneously relying on that same easement to deliver electricity, water, and communications to a multi-million-dollar commercial operation. That is not just a violation. That's leverage. Can we shut it off? She raised an eyebrow. We don't shut anything off, but we do notify the utility providers that there's a title dispute affecting infrastructure access rights. Utilities do not like uncertainty. Within days, an engineer from the electric cooperative requested a site meeting. We walked the corridor together. He confirmed what the maps showed. Every pedestal feeding those pristine RV pads drew from the main line buried within my easement strip. So if access to that strip is legally contested, I asked, what happens? He shifted uncomfortably. We'd have to evaluate service continuity. Worst case, temporary disconnection until legal clarity. Temporary disconnection. For a brand new luxury resort. Rachel amended our court filing that afternoon. We added a claim for damages, interference with property rights, and requested clarification regarding utility access obligations. She also formally notified the electric and water providers of the ongoing dispute. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I barely slept the night before. Courtrooms always feel colder than they should. Bryce was there when I walked in, flanked by two attorneys in tailored suits. He didn't smile this time. He looked annoyed, like I'd tracked mud onto his clean floor. Rachel squeezed my shoulder before we approached the bench. When it was their turn, Bryce's lead attorney launched into a speech about economic development, community benefit, change conditions, and how my use of the road created security concerns for high-end residents. High-end residents. When Rachel stood, her voice was calm and almost gentle. Your Honor, this case is not about exclusivity. It is about a recorded, permanent easement granted in 1978 and relied upon continuously for over 4 decades. The defendants erected a locked gate obstructing lawful access. At the same time, they connected their entire commercial development to utility lines located within that very easement corridor. She handed up the maps. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Counsel, is it accurate that your client is both blocking this easement and drawing power through it? There was a pause on the other side of the room. A brief, uncomfortable silence. Their attorney cleared his throat. Your Honor, the infrastructure placement predates current ownership, and that wasn't my question, the judge said evenly. Are they using it? Another pause. Yes, Your Honor. The judge looked over at Bryce, then back at the paperwork. Remove the gate within 24 hours, he said. Failure to comply will result in a contempt finding and a fine of $10,000 per day. Additionally, I expect full cooperation regarding any utility access issues pending further proceedings. His gavel came down once. It wasn't dramatic. It was final. Outside the courtroom, Bryce finally spoke to me directly. This didn't have to go this way, he muttered. I met his eyes. It didn't. The gate came down that same afternoon. I didn't hear about it from Bryce or from one of his lawyers. I heard about it from Tyler, the young security guard, who looked almost relieved when I pulled up the next day and saw nothing but fresh tire marks where the steel posts had been anchored. "They were out here with a crew right after court," he said, shifting his weight like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to be friendly. "Took the whole thing out. Didn't even wait till morning." I just nodded. Part of me wanted to feel victorious, but mostly I felt steady, like something had been set back in alignment. Driving down that road again, unobstructed, felt different. The pavement they'd laid was smooth, and for a stretch, my old gravel path merged seamlessly into their polished resort drive. On either side were manicured hedges, stone lanterns, and oversized motor coaches parked like chrome-plated mansions. For a second, I wondered what my dad would have thought seeing this. He bought quiet woods. Now there was an infinity pool 50 yards from the creek where he used to fish. But the road was still there. And so was the paper trail. The injunction was just the beginning. Rachel didn't slow down. She pushed forward with the damages claim, interference with quiet enjoyment, lost rental income, legal fees. Blue Horizon had gambled that I wouldn't fight. Now they were paying for that assumption in billable hours alone. Discovery unearthed some interesting internal emails. Nothing illegal, but revealing. One from Bryce to the company's executive team caught my eye. He'd written, "The Mercer parcel is a legacy holdout. Once the gate is up, he'll either negotiate or get tired of the inconvenience." Legacy holdout. Like I was an outdated fence they planned to remove later. Sitting in Rachel's office reading that, I felt this mix of anger and clarity. To them, I wasn't a neighbor. I was friction, an obstacle in the rendering. The damages hearing wasn't as dramatic as the injunction, but it mattered. Rachel laid out the financial impact, the refunded rental, the hiking access, the emotional distress of being effectively landlocked. She didn't overplay it. She didn't need to. Blue Horizon's attorneys tried to frame it as a misunderstanding. An overzealous security measure implemented during final construction. No malicious intent. The judge wasn't impressed. "You do not accidentally pour concrete footings and install a keyed steel gate across a recorded easement," he said dryly. In the end, the court awarded me $62,000 in damages and ordered Blue Horizon to cover my full legal costs. More importantly, the judge issued a permanent injunction prohibiting them from ever obstructing or interfering with my easement again. Permanent. That word carried weight. A week later, Bryce called me directly. "No lawyers. We'd like to make this right," he said. "Clean slate. Our investors are uncomfortable with ongoing conflict." I leaned back on the porch of the cabin, phone pressed to my ear, watching the sun drop behind the ridge. "What does clean slate look like to you?" "We'd like to purchase your parcel. Above market. $450,000. It was a strong number. Way more than my parents paid. More than I'd ever considered the land being worth when it was just woods and a small cabin. For a split second, I pictured what that money could do. Pay off my house in town. Invest. Travel. But then I looked at the tree line. The old oak my mom planted near the driveway. The creek that still sounded exactly the same as it did when I was 10. "You tried to box me out of my own land," I said evenly. "You built a gate and hoped I'd fold. That doesn't make me eager to be your business partner." There was a pause on the other end. "Business isn't personal, Daniel. It is when you make it personal." I told him I wasn't selling. Not now. Maybe not ever. If he wanted exclusivity, he should have bought land without shared access. After that call, something shifted in the dynamic around the resort. The security guards stopped eyeing me like a trespasser. A few residents, curious about the whole ordeal, introduced themselves when they saw me driving through. One older man in a spotless Prevost coach shook my hand and said, "For what it's worth, I'm glad someone stood up to corporate muscle." That surprised me. Turns out, even among people who can afford rolling luxury condos, not everyone likes seeing power flexed unfairly. Over time, the tension settled into something like coexistence. They landscaped more carefully near the easement corridor. I maintained my gravel stretch beyond their pavement. We nodded at each other when our paths crossed. But every so often, I think back to that first night, hiking 2 miles in the dark to reach property that was legally mine. I remember the way anger sat heavy in my chest, not because of the inconvenience, but because of the assumption behind it. The idea that enough money and polish could rewrite a 40-year-old agreement. It would have been easy to cut that lock, to make it physical, to let pride dictate the next move. Instead, I let paper fight paper. And paper won. The $62,000 went mostly into improvements on the cabin. New roof, reinforced deck, better drainage near the creek. I kept a framed copy of the injunction in my office at home, not out of spite, but as a reminder. Rights don't disappear just because someone builds something prettier around them. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd taken the $30,000 at the start. If I'd said, sure, cut me a check and I'll figure it out. Maybe I'd be staring at a half-finished dirt road through a ravine, regretting it. Maybe the resort would feel seamless and I'd be the one inconvenienced permanently. Or maybe Bryce would have found another boundary to push. Here's the part that still gets under my skin. In one of the depositions, an executive from Blue Horizon admitted they knew about the easement before closing on the farm. It was disclosed. They just believed it wouldn't be material in practice. Not material. That phrase tells you everything about how some companies think. If the person on the other side looks small enough, their rights feel theoretical. Until they aren't. So here's what I want to know from you. If you were in my position, would you have sold once they offered nearly $500,000? Would you have cut the lock that first night and dared them to escalate? Or would you have done exactly what I did and trusted the slow grind of the legal system? Because this wasn't just about a road. It was about whether long-standing agreements still mean something when they collide with new money and glossy brochures. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you probably think. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a developer, or a neighbor who thought power gave them shortcuts, share this story with them. Sometimes the most satisfying victories don't come from shouting the loudest. They come from knowing exactly where your line is and refusing to step back from it.